Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not just skimming the surface of history. We are plunging right into a world that was entirely undone and then, well, rebuilt in agony.
Hmm.
Our mission today is to excavate a collection of really dense historical records. We're talking fragmented accounts, strange artifacts, and some deeply, deeply personal notes, all documenting a sequence of world-altering catastrophes.
And we're going to try and reconstruct a timeline from these fragments. A timeline that's defined first by fire, then followed by 1,000 years of ice, and then the emergence of forces so terrifying they forced entire civilizations to abandon generations of hatred just to survive.
Exactly. And the way we're approaching this is key. We are treating every single etching, every mention of a relic as an eyewitness account.
Right, as if these are real, immediate, terrifying events happening to people, not just stories.
Yeah, our focus is on the sheer, overwhelming scale of global annihilation and the impossible, often morally compromising conflicts that defined what it meant to survive.
This is the history of what the sources call the Winter of the World.
And this isn't some academic history lesson. I mean, this is an account of the total reversal and, in many ways, the erasure of civilization. How do you survive when the sky, the water, the very ground beneath your feet are actively trying to consume you?
That's the core question.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey into a world that had to burn and freeze before it could even begin to fight for its life. So the archives open with this image of just unmitigated global terror, the Great Fire.
And the description is not of a natural disaster. That's the first thing that jumps out. It's described as a conscious, consuming force.
Unconscious force, yeah. The records describe it as a sea of fire that swept from north to south. It wasn't slowly engulfing things. It was moving as rolling waves of gorging flame.
That imagery, gorging flame, hungry waves, it suggests not just combustion, but, literal consumption. It has an intention.
It's feeding.
It's feeding, it's metabolizing entire cities and landscapes as it moves across the world. And the destruction was apparently instantaneous and absolute.
Cities were just swallowed whole. And the people in charge, the leaders who were supposed to provide some kind of stability, they were turned to ash where they stood.
Wow. Just imagine that moment. The instantaneous dissolution of all authority. 1 second you have a king, a council, a government.
And the next, you have a pile of dust.
It's more than a military defeat. It's a complete psychological blow. And the evidence of this, the physical proof of this annihilation, is recorded as the urn of the original ashes.
Let's talk about that artifact because it's chilling.
You have to just stop and think about what that means. An urn containing the dust of their forefathers, serving as proof of a long lineage.
But it's proof of their end, not their greatness. It's not a crown or a scepter.
No, exactly. It's a gruesome, tangible representation of total societal failure. The only thing left of their history, their political structure, their entire heritage is dust collected in a jar.
It just solidifies this idea that the past was completely, utterly erased.
And so, of course, the question then becomes, why? What caused this?
And this is where the records become highly judgmental. This fire wasn't random at all. According to the source material, it was retribution.
Retribution from the first ones.
And the reason given for this cosmic punishment, is rooted in a kind of spiritual failure.
A moral failure.
Mm.
The text says our forefathers danced and drank and ate their fill and did not honor the first ones for their gifts.
The implication there is just staggering. I mean, the ultimate existential price was paid for a failure of gratitude.
Or a failure of spiritual conduct. It frames the Great Fire as this catastrophic act of judgment. The ancestors received these powerful gifts, maybe the very gifts that let them build their civilization in the first place.
Right.
And then they just forgot the source. They indulged in hedonism. So the cost of forgetting your benefactors was global immolation.
And the environmental catastrophe that followed this spiritual collapse was just as immediate. One of the most important resources, the ocean, was instantly ruined.
The records mention an ancient golden fish.
Yeah, what do you make of that? It kept the ocean lit and fresh.
It sounds like a foundational, almost mythological element of the ecosystem. It provided both light and purity to the seas. A keystone species, but on a cosmic scale.
And when the sky burned, this life-giving creature, it dived deep, never to return.
And the consequence was immediate. The waters turned sour. The destruction of this one key, maybe singular creature instantly poisoned the primary global water source.
So the environmental breakdown wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow decline.
No, it was a sudden, violent reaction to the first catastrophe. A chain reaction. The sky burns, the fish vanishes, the ocean dies. Boom, boom, boom.
Amidst all this chaos, though, we do see these individual interventions that highlight the scale of the fight, the first of the night, facing down these fiery hot winds.
Right, and their action is so interesting. They don't fight the fire directly.
No, they weave a net and are carried away on the winds.
That is a remarkable act of adaptation. They didn't beat the danger, they embraced it. They learned to ride the catastrophe, using its own force to propel themselves to safety.
Which is such a contrast to the first to the sky.
A huge contrast. They took a much more direct, sacrificial approach, singeing their own feathers, as they somehow managed to bring the raging flames to a standstill.
So you have these two responses. One is yielding and adapting. The other is direct, costly confrontation.
And these accounts feel like they serve as these mythic descriptions of the immense personal cost that was required just to mitigate a world-ending event. While the first ones initiated the purge, life, however diminished it was, it fought back.
But I think the most striking consequence of the Great Fire is that survival itself became an act of fundamental transformation. The few living things that survived the cleansing flames, the record state, then thrived
Yeah.
and changed.
This is the point that fundamentally shifts our perspective on what's happening. We're not just talking about genetic drift or, simple evolution over time.
Yeah.
We're talking about mandated biological alteration. The text implies that survival necessitated mutation.
So the fire acted as a filter. It purged what they saw as weakness, yes, but it also fundamentally altered the surviving life forms, biologically, physically, and maybe even spiritually.
So if survival required them to become fundamentally different beings, what did they lose in that process? Was this transformation voluntary, or was it simply the immediate price the first ones demanded from the remnant?
It seems like it has to be the latter, right? They didn't choose to adapt. The fire selected for those who could sustain an immediate, fundamental alteration to their core identity.
Which means that the beings who enter the next era, the winter of the world, are already survivors of a previous apocalypse. They're carrying the physical and psychological scars of that change.
They are fundamentally distinct from the forefathers who incurred the wrath of the first ones.
They're a new, mutated, and profoundly compromised life form now, ready to face the next horror.
So the violence of the Great Fire ceases, but there's absolutely no relief. The heat gives way to an extreme sudden cold. The accounts speak of wild battering storms.
Ushering in a winter that stayed not for a season, but for a generation. Or, as the records suggest, potentially a millennium.
This is the era they defined as the winter of the world.
Oh, and we have to grasp the sheer duration of that. 1,000 years of winter. This is not a climate shift. It's a cataclysmic, sustained state of existence.
A permanent state of being. The records state civilization wasn't just halted, but reversed, erased.
Can you just imagine living in a constant state of deep, penetrating chill? The sky is perpetually gray, ash is falling ceaselessly. Every single day is a struggle against the cold and this pervasive darkness.
For 1,000 years. 1,000 years implies a complete collapse of any complex society. It forces survivors back to a baseline, desperate existence.
Of course, life was clinging to existence by the barest remaining thread. All efforts at growth, advancement, even just organized knowledge would have been completely destroyed.
And replaced by this single, overriding necessity.
Finding warmth and finding your next meal. That's it. That's your whole world.
And it's in this abyss of desperation, after the Great Fire has already made the land barren, that a supposed act of salvation arrives.
Right. The forefathers, weakened and barren, they receive aid from a figure called Mother Gull. She offers them grain and water.
This aid is documented, and I think it's telling, through the description of an artifact called the famine-bind rustic sash.
Which suggests the famine was so severe, so defining, that it required a physical embodiment or a relic to even describe its magnitude.
Yeah, exactly. And Mother Gull's intent seems benevolent. On the surface, it's an act of mercy to prevent mass starvation.
But this is where the deeper corruption of the world comes into play. The aid didn't alleviate the suffering. It amplified it.
The grain grew twisted and the water turned dark.
This wasn't just a failure of crops. This was a corruption of the very essence of life itself. The lingering curse from the first ones, or maybe the permanent toxicity of the environment, meant that even a divine or powerful act of generosity was doomed to catastrophic failure.
And the outcome of consuming this corrupted gift, is maybe the single most chilling detail in these archives. It's known as the wretch. Those who consumed Mother Gull's offering birthed monsters that fed on the flesh of one another.
What's truly terrifying about that is the nature of the consequence. It wasn't simple death or disease. The act of attempted survival, eating the grain, drinking the water, led directly to monstrous procreation.
And internal violence. The aid that was intended to end starvation instead gave birth to cannibalistic monsters.
This elevates the horror from an external threat, the cold, the famine, to a profound internal moral collapse. The family unit, the most basic refuge for any surviving population, was broken by this biological nightmare.
Your own children become the threat.
Absolutely. The source of salvation became the source of self-destruction. And this teaches the survivors a terrible, terrible lesson.
Which is?
That even aid and generosity are tainted. They cannot be trusted. It ensures that every future act of survival, even those that seem to be based on community or kindness, must be viewed with utter suspicion.
The winter of the world didn't just freeze the world. It poisoned the very idea of hope for generational continuity. It forced them to fight not only the environment, but their own offspring. So, as the survivors are struggling with this deep cold and this internal biological horror, the exterior threat evolves. It goes from an environmental disaster into organized sentient malice.
Right. In the pervasive gloom of the winter, after the fall of this foreign tyrant named On in the south, horrible creatures flooded forth.
They're called the lightless, or sometimes the abyssals, and they're described as being born of bone, blood, and foul magic.
This marks a major transition to conscious war. And what's crucial here is that detail, that they are created, not born.
What do you take from that?
It indicates an artificial, maybe magically engineered origin. They are not a natural phenomenon. They are a deliberate weapon or maybe a consequence that's tied directly to the pervasive darkness of the winter.
Their very existence is defined by the absence of light. We learn that every moment in the light was agony for them.
So they're intrinsically tied to the 1,000 years of ash-blotted skies and ceaseless gloom. In a way, they are the living embodiment of the winter's destructive nature.
And their commitment is absolute. They're described as a tireless, relentless force. They ceaselessly sprout from the murderous earth.
And their core philosophy is unwavering. We serve only the night. They exist purely to serve that oppressive darkness.
Their dominion is what makes them so frightening. It's total. It's not just the living they hunt. The records confirm even the dead serve the lightless.
That eliminates the possibility of refuge or rest or even a peaceful end for the fallen. The abyssals are constantly searching forever for more souls to drag to the dark.
So there is no escape. Not in life, not in death.
No escape for anyone, anywhere. But the irony here, as the source materials hint, is deeply unsettling.
Our own creations that destroy us in the end.
Exactly. If these forces were created, not born, and their emergence coincides with the fall of a tyrant, it suggests the lightless might have been a failed magical weapon.
Or a consequence of some prior hubris. Or maybe On's desperate, dying curse that just outlived him.
So if they are the inheritors of the failure of a prior civilization, it fundamentally changes the nature of this fight.
How so?
Well, the survivors aren't fighting an external invasion from some other world. They're fighting the murderous, manifested consequence of their own ancestors' failed attempts at control or power. It's a perpetual, self-inflicted wound.
A ghost from the past that's trying to literally drag you into the dark.
And the visual details in the records, they just reinforce this warped grandeur. They build empires that are described as ghastly and gaunt, yet they paradoxically glitter with gold.
So they have this perverse wealth that's acquired through destruction. They're forces of decay and emptiness, but they exhibit organization and a terrifying mastery over what they consume.
Their appearance is equally haunting. The texts mention hollow, hypnotizing eyes,
which suggests a hypnotic quality to their gaze, maybe reflecting the emptiness of their created souls, something they use to lure or control both the living and the dead.
And that presence of this ghastly wealth, the glittering gold in their gaunt empires, it speaks to a crucial motivation. The lightless are seeking to accumulate power and treasure, even if they themselves are inherently destructive and antithetical to life.
It's the ultimate expression of consuming emptiness, a force that destroys the world but still wants to possess the world's treasures.
The threat isn't just death. It's the total erasure of substance and value, leaving behind only this grotesque facade of stolen power.
So, facing these ceaseless, lightless, and the endless winter, survival demanded radical, desperate adaptation. And we have 3 really distinct examples in the archives that show the different societal or personal prices that were paid.
Right, we have the Asmeri's sanctuary, Achilles' hunger for control, and the Maraketh's brutal tradition.
Let's start with the Asmeri. Their response was the creation of the Viridian Wildwood.
This was a monumental protective haven. It was deliberately marked by their wise ones, the Magi, as the future home of their people. It was a calculated withdrawal, an enclosure against the crushing cold and the ash-blotted skies.
What's so striking about this account is who created it. It wasn't built with stones and fortifications. It was made by the Dryart.
Defined in the source as the Sisters Three, or the collective will of nature itself.
And the cost of this safety was staggering. It reveals the high price of creating a pocket of life in a world of death. The Dryot gave so many pieces of themselves to create this self-sustaining haven that, in the end, little remained.
They didn't just exert energy. They dissolved their singular personal identities into the environment itself.
They became the refuge. The source says they are now mere fragments in every tree, every rock, and every animal.
So the haven exists. It functions perfectly. But its creators sacrificed their conscious unity, their individual identities to provide it. That's a profound total sacrifice, a willing scattering of the self to ensure the physical survival of the community.
Now, if we move from that societal sacrifice to a profound personal trauma, we turn to Akyeli, the clay shaper.
Her narrative begins with terrible immediate loss. She fled her village, finding temporary safety, ironically, in the clouds of ash above.
And the aftermath of her flight revealed the true devastation. She came back to find her village in splinters, her home, her creations, and most tragically, her family. It was a personal annihilation that mirrored the global one.
And the image she witnessed of the river.
Yeah.
It's a moment of pure, visceral horror. The river, which should be a symbol of life and renewal, was stained at a standstill.
Because it was damned by the coagulating dead.
That description, the dead bodies having formed a solid, static dam that alters the landscape, it speaks to a death toll so overwhelming that nature itself was corrupted and literally stopped by it.
That kind of catastrophic trauma has to fundamentally rewrite a person's core beliefs, and her resulting motive, captured in the archive, is this desperate hunger for total control.
Yes, she concludes, there is nothing, flesh, spirit, or stone, free from our hunger for dominion.
She witnessed chaos, vulnerability, and a total betrayal by the natural order, the river, the fire. So for her, safety became synonymous with absolute mastery.
She stopped shaping benign clay and started shaping reality itself. She came to believe that absolute control over material and spiritual realms was the only antidote to the random, murderous chaos she had witnessed.
Her desire for dominion is her trauma, weaponized, a desperate attempt to ensure nothing can ever surprise or destroy her again.
A harrowing response.
Yeah.
And our final example of adaptation comes from the Maraketh. Their response to the darkness and disorder was defined by strict tradition, bordering on brutal.
Their core belief was simple. Disorder meant death. So structure and fighting to live were paramount.
Their strength lay in their unwavering adherence to shared beliefs, a strength that was necessary in an era where everyone else was fragmenting or succumbing to things like the wretch. But their traditions required immense ethical compromise.
Right, and this is essential to examine. The source mentions the uncomfortable practice of slavery. Captured enemies were forced to serve in carts rather than being executed.
And the justification offered for this practice is just chillingly pragmatic. We're told there are not enough resources to keep prisoners who do not work. It is a cold, functional equation.
This raises a critical question about morality under existential duress, doesn't it?
It does. If necessity dictates that prisoners must be exploited rather than killed, does that still count as a moral choice? Or has ethics entirely vanished, replaced purely by function?
The Maraketh archives suggest they viewed this as perhaps the lesser of two evils.
They chose utility over mercy. Killing them is a waste of energy. Forcing them to work allows their energy to contribute to the group's survival against the lightless.
It's a terrifying insight into a society where morality is defined not by some intrinsic rightness, but by the raw necessity of survival in an environment that is infinitely more brutal than their own customs.
Their laws are harsh, because the cost of failure is annihilation. And we should also note here that their leaders, the Sikimas, were figures of immense spiritual and political authority, tested through the most harrowing trials to ensure this brutal efficiency was maintained right from the top.
The records transition now. They move into a series of deeply personal notes. They're called etchings. and they give us a front-row seat to the internal politics of the Marraketh during the winter.
And this is the tragic story of Varashta, an early Sekima, and the profound cosmic betrayal she suffered at the hands of a man named Zerok.
This event takes place deep within the halls of the Marraketh. These are chambers built specifically to determine worthiness and honor, and the setting is the ascendancy trial for a new Sekima.
These rituals were essential. The society needed to know its leaders were absolutely capable of withstanding any pressure.
And we get a vivid glimpse into the brutality of these trials. We hear about the ritual of womanhood, which involved dancing with the lethal black Marraketh scorpion. Their tails were swift, and their poison, lethal.
The stakes were literal, life and death. We hear this tragic anecdote of a woman named Erasha. She survived her trial unscathed, proving her worth.
But her own sister died right there, thrashing and foaming at the mouth. So the trial wasn't just a test, it was a societal culling.
Absolutely. It created this foundational tension. Leadership was earned through absolute confrontation with mortality. There was no faking it.
And it's into this highly charged environment that Zarok enters. He starts as a Taljari, a simple nomadic figure, maybe an itinerant soothsayer, but through his helpfulness, he rose to become something more.
And Varashta trusted him. She even allowed him to bless the halls, believing he means well.
So the relationship began with respect and mutual honor, all within the strict confines of their tradition. Varashta, the ultimate enforcer of duty, came to rely on him.
And that reliance is what makes the moment of betrayal, captured in Etchings III, so catastrophic.
Varashta writes in what sounds like twilight, "The air has cooled, the sun is low, and then this sudden gut-wrenching shock, and I am betrayed. I see what he is. I see what a fool I have been."
The realization wasn't gradual. It was an immediate, painful flash of insight into a profound deceit.
But the betrayal instantly dwarfs simple political intrigue. She realizes he is more than just some deceitful soothsayer. The truth she uncovers is cosmic in scale.
Zarok, he manipulates time itself.
What does that even mean in this context? Is he physically altering the past? Or is he twisting Varashta's perception of reality, ensuring her torment is eternal not just in duration, but in the constant reliving of her betrayal?
The source material leans toward an actual fundamental breaking of reality. You could see it in her desperate question. Where did he gain such power?
Right.
She, as this goddess-like figure, is dealing with power she never expected to encounter or combat. It implies his manipulation isn't just trickery, it's a mastery over the very fabric of existence.
Her urgency, I must find a way to fix this, it underscores that she's fighting not just a traitor, but a temporal catastrophe.
She acts swiftly. She invokes a ritual to bind him as a djinn in the farthest, unused halls. He is trapped, bound there for his crimes. But the confrontation, it had irreversible consequences.
This is the ultimate tragic twist, isn't it? Zarok's power over time allowed him to impose a curse that sealed Varashta too.
She is trapped, but not so much in place, but in time. She is caught between now and tomorrow, but never thereafter.
Her fate is to eternally exist in this liminal space. She's unable to progress forward, unable to reach the future she fought to protect.
And the physical deterioration she describes as agonizing, precisely because she's conscious of it. Her eyes are as dry as the sands, her lips shrivel, her bones ache. She is deteriorating, yet she is permanently preserved in her state of torment.
Resting permanently in eternal agony. And her final message is this plea to future Sikimas: do not venture further, a warning born from her own unending nightmare.
Now let's consider Zarok's perspective for a moment, which just confirms the horrific nature of their shared fate. He calls it a unique bond, a bond in time, a bond in pain.
His motive wasn't simple treachery. It was colossal, warped ambition. He saw Varashta's duty-bound honor as pathetic.
He didn't want to destroy her. He wanted her by his side, elevated beyond duty, so they could rule all of Ray-class together.
And when she refused to abandon her honor, he condemned her to a fate where she is eternally preserved and tormented, bound to the very place where he is imprisoned.
The tension here is absolute. They are now inseparable in their suffering. And if anyone attempts to remove her, the curse ensures she will perish with her first breath of air outside that chamber.
So their eternal torment is sealed by the threat of instant death upon release. There's no way out for either of them.
And we understand the raw determination of Zarok when the sources note that even after they ripped out his soul, but he refused to be imprisoned.
So even that wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. He is so potent, so determined, that the act of ripping out his very essence failed to truly bind him. He leveraged his power over time and pain to ensure that even in his spiritual imprisonment, he controlled the fate of his captor and anyone who might try to intervene.
The psychological horror is that Varashta's attempt to restore order resulted in her being eternally bound to the very chaos she tried to contain. These internal betrayals, like what happened with Varashta and Zorak, were devastating. But the external threat of the Lightless was so overwhelming that it forced an extraordinary geopolitical response.
Right. During the coldest depths of the winter, when all these individual strategies were failing, the civilizations formed what's known as the Third Pact.
And this is a stunning moment of unification, one born purely from the primal need for survival.
The records indicate that all life in the Vistiri banded together. And this was not an alliance of convenience between similar parties. This is a desperate, unnatural unity between mortal enemies.
Whether serpent, hyena, human, or golem, hated enemies, clasped hand to claw, built refuge, and fought side by side against the abyssals.
So the Lightless were the one threat, the only threat, capable of silencing all internal generational hatreds. But because those hatreds were so deep-seated, the pact had to be formalized with specific, unforgiving terms to prevent backstabbing and total destabilization.
You can see that in the terms themselves. They codified this uneasy peace. For example, the Sun Clan, who were presumably a powerful aggressor, agreed to never again attack the Mariketh.
That signals a massive and forced shift in the political landscape.
Yeah.
It's proof that shared fear trumps ancient animosity, at least for a time.
And even figures of immense power were subject to this new world order. The Constrictor Queen Kabbalah was banished from Keth, the Heartland, but she was given the Eastern Sands as her new territory.
This wasn't just punishment. It was a strategic, pragmatic territorial division. It was designed to end immediate conflict and utilize resources efficiently in the fight against the Abyssals.
And you can tell the trust was, well, it was wafer thin.
Oh, absolutely. That's critical to understanding the atmosphere of the pact. A single hostage was taken from the Serpent Queen's clan as punishment. This shows the alliance was not built on genuine harmony.
No, it was built on codified, enforceable consequences. Unity was secured through mutual fear and the explicit threat of retaliation.
And the pact also established these strict parameters for movement and ritual, showing its long-reaching impact. They designated the Valley of the Titans as a forbidden zone.
And the Mariketh are explicitly warned not to tarry there.
And the reason given is chilling. Ancient pacts in this world that govern more than you and I are meant to know, but we still may suffer the consequences if we break them.
So the geopolitical structure of the Third Pact is layered on top of older cosmic or divine rules whose consequences are still lethal, even if the rules themselves are forgotten.
Or even if the entities that made them are long gone. The world is bound by these invisible laws that predate memory, and the Third Pact simply had to acknowledge and enforce them.
This political structure also regulated spiritual practices. One source mentions being forbidden from invoking the right of flame oneself, that you need an emissary instead. Servants of the Dreamer are explicitly forbidden from entering the Valley of the Titans.
So the long arm of this desperate agreement dictates everything from movement to ritual practice, centuries after it was signed.
And this brings us to the core of the compromise, the role of the Dreamer. This entity gave the desperate alliance crucial knowledge they needed to fight the Abyssals and survive the winter.
But as we've established time and time again, nothing in this history is free.
The payment was deeply ominous. In return for the knowledge, the Alliance gave the Dreamer a drop of blood, one from each of the races of Rayclast.
This wasn't gold. It wasn't land. It was the essence of their collective life.
This is the ultimate profound cost of the Pact. They gave the Dreamer a single, composite sample of the soul, the very essence of all living things that banded together.
They traded immediate survival for a piece of their collective soul.
The foreshadowing here is heavy and terrifying. The archives conclude that in the centuries that followed this exchange, the Dreamer's will began to subtly change.
The implication is that feeding the Dreamer with this unique composite blood, the essence of serpent, hyena, human, and golem, it fundamentally corrupted or altered the entity.
They created a new enemy, a systemic threat for the future, by feeding it with the life essence of all who survived the winter.
The desperation of the Third Pact solved an immediate environmental and existential war, but it secured a potentially devastating internal threat that would unfold generations later. This is the definition of trading one catastrophe for the next.
So the winter of the world, defined by fire, ice, betrayal, these dark pacts, and ceaseless war, it finally reached its crescendo.
Hmm.
The archives tell us that when hope was only a distant memory, two heroic figures arose to challenge the pervasive darkness: the twin sisters Acamas, Solarai, and Lundara.
They represented a return to strength, to a singular purpose, and they managed to unite the scattered peoples of the Marikith for the first time since that initial catastrophe.
They wielded the essence of gold and silver. These are symbols not just of light and purity, but of political and spiritual authority. Their weapons are referred to as one of the two weapons that forged us.
Their great feat wasn't just a battle. It was a fundamental act of defiance against the environment itself. A tale woman named Ranga preserves the moment of their climactic action.
Lindora held back the hordes of creatures, the ceaseless abyssals, using her martial prowess to buy time.
So while Lundara managed the immediate physical threat, Solarai performed the world-altering magic. She rose to split the sky with a single, powerful stroke.
And this was the literal definitive end of the thousand-year environmental catastrophe.
The gray skies, perpetually choked with ash, had no choice but to give way to that brilliance. The transformation was miraculous and immediate.
The creatures retreated back under the sands, unable to endure the light, and the barren plains that had suffered the fire in the winter, they blazed with life. Emerald forests and sapphire rivers.
It's an incredible victory. But this heroic victory, it raises profound questions about identity and history. Scholars, when they examine this story, they strongly suspect that Solarai and Lundara are, respectively, Solaris and Lunaris.
Divine figures revered across different cultures and other myths.
Exactly. So if the Merikasekimas, who ended the cold, are the same divine figures worshipped elsewhere, it dramatically expands the scope of the narrative.
It would confirm that the winter of the world was a universal experience, and the heroes who overcame it belonged not just to one people, but to all life. It would mean a shared, core, foundational history that crosses all those tribal lines.
But history, in this archive, is an inescapable cycle. The victory did not bring a permanent paradise. While everyone rejoiced that the cold was banished, the very act of shattering the gray sky and restoring the natural light, it introduced the next crisis.
The record notes ominously that sandier climes began to creep in.
The heroic solution to one massive environmental disaster, the 1,000 years of ice and ash, immediately introduced the next great threat.
The changing seasons, intense heat and drought.
The world is never static. The struggle for survival is never truly over. It just changes form, perpetually demanding new forms of adaptation and compromise. #tag outro. So if we synthesize this entire horrific timeline, you see a consistent, brutal cycle. You have spiritual failure leading to the fire, then the ash, then the 1,000 years of ice.
Which mandated the desperate, unnatural unity of the Third Pact.
Right, and that unity, backed by a heroic singular intervention, ended the cold, only to introduce the next phase: heat and sand.
The consistent thread throughout this entire epoch is that survival always comes at a profound, fundamental cost.
Always.
The Mariketh's survival required brutal tradition and ethical compromise. Varashta's duty cost her her very experience of time, sealing her in eternal, conscious agony alongside her betrayer, Zarak.
And perhaps most unsettling is the immense cost of the Third Pact. They successfully fought the Lightless by unifying with hated enemies and paying the Dreamer with the essence of their collective life.
They solved the immediate threat, but they created a ticking time bomb, a potentially devastating future enemy whose will began to subtly change because of that desperate exchange.
We've spent this deep dive analyzing sealed fates and ancient boundaries. From the eternal, temporal torment binding Varashta and Zarak to the ancient pacts that govern the Forbidden Valley of the Titans.
These sources prove that in this world, the most volatile, enduring things are not the elements, not the flames or the ice. They're the permanent binding agreements made in the ultimate moment of desperation.
And these pacts continue to determine what is forbidden, who is owed, and whose fate is sealed, even after 1,000 years have passed and the initial crisis has been solved.
So we leave you with this provocative thought. What lasting pacts, visible or invisible agreements made in moments of extreme emotional, financial, or personal need, govern your own life, determining your freedoms and your boundaries even now, long after the moment of desperation has passed?
Think carefully about the agreements you make when you are fighting simply to survive.